3 days after I buried both of my parents, my own sister stood in the doorway of my childhood home, looked me dead in the eye, and told me to go find somewhere else to die. She wasn't finished. She had already brought moving boxes. She had already brought her husband along to help carry my things out to the curb. 2 years earlier, a drunk driver had put me in a wheelchair, and I had spent every single day since fighting my way back to walking again with nothing but a cane. My sister barely called during any of it. But 3 days after we lowered our parents into the ground, she wanted my key back, and she wanted me out by Friday. What she didn't know was that our father had left something behind, tucked in the bottom drawer of his desk. It was a business card with 6 words written across the back in his own handwriting. 6 words that would end up meaning far more than either of us understood on the day I found them. My sister believed our parents had left everything to her. She stood right there in that living room and announced to the whole family that the lawyer had already confirmed it. There was just one problem. She never once said his name, and I had known our parents' attorney for most of my life. 3 days after that, the two of us were sitting across from each other in his office, and what he pulled out of his briefcase was not the 4-page document sitting in our mother's nightstand. It was 32 pages, notarized, filed with the probate court, and dated 6 months before our parents died. 6 months, meaning right after the Christmas my sister had told me I didn't belong in the family photo. Inside that document was a letter, and there was also a video. Our parents had recorded it themselves, months before their plane went down over the mountains of Nevada, and they had made absolutely sure it would only be played in that room, in front of both of us, at exactly the right moment. I won't tell you yet everything that was inside it. But I will tell you this. The sister who told me to go find somewhere else to die had no idea how wrong she was about to be proven. Watching from where? Please comment. My name is Grace Whitfield, and I was 34 years old when my sister looked me in the eye and told me to find somewhere else to die. 3 days after our parents' funeral, while I was still leaning on a cane from a car accident that had nearly killed me 2 years before, Diane stood in the doorway of the only home I had left and said those words without a single tear in her eyes. She had brought moving boxes with her. She had brought her husband. And she had brought a coldness I never knew was living inside her. Our parents had just been buried. The flowers on their graves hadn't even started to wilt. And my own sister, my own blood, was throwing me out of the house where I had spent the last 2 years recovering, healing, and caring for the very people she barely bothered to visit. She thought I had nothing left. She thought I was useless. She thought wrong. Before I tell you what happened at the lawyer's office 3 days after that, I just want to say, if you're enjoying this story so far, feel free to like and follow along. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. To understand why those words cut as deep as they did, I need to take you back to the day everything in my life changed. 2 years before my parents died, I was working as a landscape architect with my own small firm in Hartford. I designed gardens for wealthy clients, restored historic properties, and had just signed a contract with the city's Botanical Society. Life made sense back then. Then a drunk driver ran a red light. I don't remember the impact itself. I only remember waking up in a hospital bed with metal rods fused into my spine and a doctor telling me I might never walk again. The surgery lasted 11 hours. The recovery would take years. My apartment had stairs I couldn't manage. My office had projects I couldn't keep up with. My savings had limits that medical bills didn't care about. So when my parents offered me their guest room on the ground floor, I said yes. I moved back into the house I grew up in, into the same bedroom that still held my old high school track trophies on the shelf. For 18 months, I got around in a wheelchair. I learned to navigate door frames and bathroom tiles, and the particular humiliation of needing help with things I had managed alone since I was a child. My mother read to me on the hard days. My father built a ramp off the back porch so I could sit out in the garden. Diane called maybe once a month, sometimes less. She never once asked about my physical therapy. She never asked how I was holding up. The few times she called and I happened to answer, her response was always the same. "Oh, you're still there. Put Mom on." Still there. Like I was a stain that wouldn't wash out. What Diane never bothered to find out was that 4 months before our parents died, I had already started walking again. First with a walker, then with a cane. I was healing. I was getting stronger every week. But to her, I would always be the useless one. The Christmas before our parents died, Diane came home with her picture-perfect family in tow. Her husband, Paul, wore a coat that probably cost more than my monthly medical bills. Their 2 kids, Lily and Owen, ran through the house like they owned every inch of it. Diane directed everyone like a stage manager, rearranging furniture, critiquing our mother's table settings, reminding everyone how things were supposed to be done. I spent 3 days making the kids' favorite meals: homemade macaroni and cheese for Owen, chocolate chip pancakes for Lily. I made them standing at the counter with my cane propped against the stove, my back aching after 20 minutes, because I wanted to contribute something. I wanted to feel useful. On Christmas morning, everyone gathered in the living room for the family photo. My father set up the tripod. My mother straightened the ornaments on the tree. The kids fought over who got to stand in front. Diane looked at me and smiled, though it wasn't a warm smile at all. "Grace, maybe you should sit this one out. We want a nice picture for the card this year." The room went quiet. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it again. My father stared straight ahead at the camera as if he hadn't heard a word. "It's just," Diane shrugged. "The wheelchair doesn't really match the picture, you know." I wasn't even using the wheelchair anymore by then. I was standing on my own with a cane. But I didn't argue. I had already learned that arguing with Diane only gave her more to work with, so I smiled, nodded, and walked into the kitchen. Through the window, I watched my family pose without me. I heard the shutter click once, twice, 3 times. I didn't know then that my father had watched the entire thing happen, and I had no idea what he would go and do the very next morning. Our parents died on a Tuesday in March. They were flying out to California for an old college friend's wedding, a small private charter, 6 passengers, clear skies the whole way. The plane went down somewhere over Nevada. Officials said it was a mechanical failure. They said it happened fast. I was out in the garden when the call came, pruning the roses my mother had planted 15 years earlier. The phone rang, and 30 seconds later, my entire world fell apart. Diane flew in for the funeral and took charge of everything: the arrangements, the flowers, the guest list. I was too numb to argue with her about any of it. I sat in the front pew during the service and realized I didn't recognize half the people in the room. They were Diane's friends, Diane's business contacts, people who had never once met our parents but wanted to be seen paying their respects. 3 days after we buried them, Diane asked to speak with me alone. She found me sitting in the living room, surrounded by sympathy cards I still couldn't bring myself to open. She didn't sit down. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, Paul hovering behind her like a shadow. "I spoke with the lawyer," she said. "Everything goes to me. The house, the accounts, all of it." I looked up. "What lawyer?" "The lawyer." She waved a hand like the detail didn't matter. "Mom and Dad's estate attorney. He confirmed it." "Did he give you anything? A copy of the will?" Her eye twitched just slightly. "I don't need to show you anything. You have 2 weeks to find somewhere else to live." Something cold settled low in my stomach. She had said, "the lawyer." Not a name, not a firm, just the lawyer. Our parents had used Gerald Sanford for over 20 years. If Diane had actually spoken to him, she would have said his name. She was bluffing. That night, I sat alone in my father's study and took stock of my life. No job. I had closed my firm 18 months earlier when the medical bills made it impossible to keep the lights on. No real savings. Whatever I had left went straight to copays, specialists, and an endless line of prescriptions, keeping my spine from locking up. No steady income. My disability payments barely covered the basics. And now, apparently, no home. I looked around that room. My father's desk, worn smooth from 40 years of use. My mother's reading chair, the fabric faded where she always rested her head. The window overlooking the garden we had built together, her planting, me designing, both of us dreaming about what it might become. This house wasn't just walls and a roof. It was where I took my first steps, where I learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where my mother taught me to cook and my father taught me to argue my point. Every room held a memory. Every corner held a piece of them. If I walked away now, I wouldn't just lose a house. I would lose them all over again. And worse, I would be proving Diane right. I would be agreeing that I was useless, that I didn't deserve to be here, that I was worth nothing. I couldn't accept that. I wouldn't. I started pulling open drawers, searching for anything that might prove Diane wrong. In the bottom drawer of my father's desk, underneath old tax returns and faded photographs, I found a business card. Gerald Sanford, estate attorney. I turned it over. On the back, in my father's careful handwriting, were 6 words. Call him. He knows everything. My father never wrote notes like that. Never. So why this one? 3 days later, Diane came back. I was in the living room, practicing walking without my cane. My physical therapist had said I was finally ready to try. I wanted to prove to myself that I could do at least one thing on my own. The front door slammed open. Diane walked in carrying cardboard boxes, Paul trailing behind with more. She dropped them at my feet, and the hollow thud echoed through the room. "Pack your things," she said. "You have until Friday." "Diane, I need more time." "More time? You've been milking this for 2 years." She kicked one of the boxes toward me. "You're not sick anymore. You've had long enough." Paul shifted uncomfortably behind her. "Honey, maybe we should stay out of this." Just then, I heard Nora, the nurse who had cared for our parents through their final months, come in from the kitchen. She stopped in the doorway, eyes wide. Beside her stood Carol, our neighbor of 40 years, who had come by to drop off a casserole. They both heard exactly what came next. Diane stepped closer, close enough that I could smell her perfume, something sharp and expensive. She looked at me the way you'd look at trash waiting to be hauled away. "Find somewhere else to die," she said. "You're useless now." The words hung in the air. Nora made a small, sharp sound. Carol's hand flew to her chest. Diane didn't even glance at either of them. To her, they weren't worth noticing, but I caught Nora doing something strange. She pulled a small notebook from her pocket and quietly wrote something down, quick and discreet, like she was recording a patient's vitals. I didn't understand it at the time. Later, I would. Carol moved first. She stepped forward, her 70-year-old frame suddenly rigid with the kind of anger only decades of friendship can produce. She had known our mother since before I was born. She had held me as a baby. She had watched both of us grow up, and she had clearly picked her side. "Diane Elaine Whitfield," Carol's voice could have cut glass. "Your mother would be turning in her grave right now." Diane turned slowly, her face arranged into polite confusion. "I'm sorry. Who invited you into this conversation?" "I've known this family 40 years. Longer than you've been alive, young lady. This is family business." "I was family before you learned to walk." Carol moved to stand beside me, her hand finding my arm. "Margaret loved both her daughters, but she wasn't blind, Diane. None of us were." Something flickered across Diane's face. Uncertainty, maybe, or just irritation at being challenged. Paul stepped forward, reaching for his wife's elbow. "Vic, come on. We can talk about this later." "Don't touch me." She pulled away, her voice rising. "My mother left me in charge. Not her. Not some neighbor who thinks she has a say." "Your mother didn't leave you in charge of anything," Carol said quietly. "Final. Not yet." The room went still. Diane's jaw tightened. She looked at me, then at Carol, then at Nora, who was still standing in the kitchen doorway with her notebook. "Fine." Diane grabbed Paul's arm and pulled him toward the door. "Friday, Grace. I want you out by Friday." The door slammed behind them. Carol squeezed my arm. "Don't you worry, honey. This isn't over." I wanted so badly to believe her. The next morning, Paul came back alone. I found him standing on the porch, hands shoved in his pockets, looking like a man who'd lost an argument with his own reflection. When I opened the door, he flinched. "Diane doesn't know I'm here," he said quickly. "Can we talk?" I let him in. We sat in the living room, him on the edge of my mother's chair, me on the couch with my cane propped against the armrest. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Look," he started, "about yesterday. Diane's under a lot of pressure." "Pressure to throw her disabled sister out of her dead parents' house?" He winced. "It's not personal, Grace. We just really need the money." I went very still. "Need? The house alone is worth—" He stopped himself, caught the words before they got away from him. "I mean, the estate should just be settled quickly. For everyone's sake. Paul. I leaned forward. What's going on? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, we're in trouble. Some investments I made last year, they didn't work out. We owe a lot, more than we can cover. How much? He stared at the ceiling, then the floor, anywhere but at me. 400,000, give or take. The number sat between us like smoke. The bank's threatening to take our house, he continued. The kids' school is already asking about next semester's tuition. Diane's trying to hold it all together, but... Diane's voice sliced through the room from the doorway, sharp as a blade. We both jumped. I hadn't even heard her car pull up. What are you doing here? She grabbed his arm, knuckles white. We're leaving, now. Paul mouthed something at me as she dragged him out. It might have been sorry. It might have been help. I know some of you are probably thinking, why didn't you fight back, Grace? Why didn't you say something? I asked myself that same question. But here's what I've come to understand. Sometimes the strongest response isn't a response at all. If you've ever had someone underestimate you completely, type, I know, in the comments below. And if you're curious what happened at that lawyer's office 3 days later, keep watching. Now, back to the story. That evening, I found the business card again. Gerald Sanford, estate attorney. The handwriting on the back seemed to glow under the desk lamp. Call him. He knows everything. I dialed the number before I could talk myself out of it. It rang twice, then a deep, measured voice answered. Sanford Law Office. Mr. Sanford, this is Grace Whitfield, Walter and Margaret's daughter. A pause. Then, warmer. Miss Whitfield, I've been waiting for your call. Your father was quite confident you'd reach out. Papers rustled somewhere in the background. I understand your sister has been making claims about the estate, that everything goes to her, that you confirmed it yourself. A dry laugh. I haven't spoken to Diane since your parents' anniversary party 3 years ago. She certainly hasn't contacted my office. Relief flooded through me so fast, it was almost dizzying. So she's lying. I wouldn't presume to characterize your sister's statements. What I can tell you is that your parents were very specific about their wishes. A pause, longer this time. I'd like you to come to my office before the official reading. There are things you need to know that no one else does, not even your sister. I wrote down the appointment time with a shaking hand. Miss Whitfield, he added, his voice softening. Your father changed his will 6 months ago, right after Christmas. He told me he finally saw things clearly. The Christmas photo, the one I wasn't in. He had been watching after all. The day before the official reading, Nora came by to say goodbye. She stood on the porch with a cardigan pulled tight around her shoulders, looking smaller than I remembered her. For 8 months, she had been a fixture in that house, taking our parents' vitals, managing their medications, sitting up with our mother through the long nights when the pain wouldn't let her sleep. Now her work there was finished, and she was moving on to another family, another patient, another ending. I wanted to give you something, she said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a leather-bound notebook, worn soft at the edges. I recognized it instantly. My mother's handwriting filled the visible page, that familiar looping cursive, the way she always pressed too hard with the pen. Your mother asked me to keep this safe, Nora said, pressing it into my hands. She said you'd need it someday. She said you'd know when. I ran my thumb over my mother's initials on the cover. What's in it? Her thoughts, her days, what she noticed. Nora hesitated. The last few pages are about you and your sister. I never read them. It wasn't my place. But I think she wanted you to understand something. Understand what? Nora glanced toward the street, as if checking that we were really alone. There's something else with Mr. Sanford. Your mother recorded a message a few months back. A video. She held my gaze. She was very clear about when it should be played. My throat tightened. Nora, why are you telling me this? She squeezed my hand. Your mother knew, Grace. She knew exactly what Diane would do, and she prepared for it. Nora stepped back toward her car. Your parents loved you both, but they weren't blind. The notebook felt heavy in my hands, like a promise and like a warning. Diane organized the memorial reception the way she organized everything else, expensively and without asking anyone's opinion. She chose an upscale Italian restaurant, the kind with cloth napkins and waiters who introduced themselves by name. She rented out the private dining room, arranged the catering, and sent invitations on cream cardstock with our parents' names embossed in gold. She never asked me about the menu. She never asked me about the guest list. She never asked me anything at all. I arrived late. My taxi got stuck in traffic, and walking from the parking lot with my cane took longer than I'd planned. By the time I reached the entrance of the private room, Diane was already standing at the head of the long table, wine glass in hand, mid-speech. 40 people sat in front of her. Aunts and uncles I barely recognized, friends of our parents whose names I'd forgotten, Paul's business associates, Diane's book club. A sea of faces, some genuinely grieving, most just there to be seen. They worked their whole lives for this family, Diane was saying, her voice carrying that particular pitch she used when she wanted to be admired. And I promise to honor that legacy. This house, this community, everything they built, I will protect it. She said, this family, like it was a claim, like a deed of ownership. I stood in the doorway, and not one person in that room acknowledged me. Mom and Dad would be so proud of what we've built, Diane continued. The Whitfield name will endure. I'll make sure of it. She hadn't mentioned me once, not a single time. It was as if I had already been erased from the family she claimed she was so determined to protect. I gripped my cane until my knuckles went white. Someone in the crowd finally noticed me. A murmur rippled through the room, heads turning. Diane's speech faltered for just a second before she recovered with a practiced smile. Grace, you made it. The way she said it, like my presence was a mild surprise, an afterthought, made my skin crawl. I made my way toward an empty seat near the back, my cane tapping against the polished floor in the silence. Diane. It was Aunt Louise, our father's older sister, speaking from the middle of the table. What about Grace? Where is she going to live now? The question hung there. 40 pairs of eyes shifted between us. Diane's smile never wavered. Grace has her own plans. She's transitioning. Transitioning to where? Louise pressed. Diane shrugged delicately. Wherever she can manage. She's always been resourceful. A few people chuckled, small, nervous laughs, the kind people make when they don't know what else to do. But they laughed. I stood there with my cane, feeling the weight of every stare in the room. Some looked at me with pity, some with judgment. Most just looked away, uncomfortable, eager to get back to their wine and small talk. Diane glided past me on her way to greet someone at another table. As she passed, she leaned in close. I told you to stay home, she whispered. You're embarrassing yourself. I didn't respond. I remembered what Gerald Sanford had told me that morning in his office. Let her talk. The more she says now, the louder the silence will be later. So I found my seat, folded my hands in my lap, and waited. Diane had no idea what was coming. Carol arrived 20 minutes later, dressed in black, wearing a look that could curdle milk. She scanned the room until she spotted me alone at a corner table, pushing food around my plate without eating. Then her gaze shifted to Diane, who was holding court near the bar, laughing at something Paul had said. Carol's jaw tightened. She walked straight over to me. Is it true? She asked, sitting down. What Louise just told me. Did Diane really say you're transitioning? I nodded. Carol stood back up. Before I could stop her, she raised her voice, loud enough to cut clean through every conversation in the room. Margaret and Walter would be ashamed if they could see this right now. The room went silent. Diane turned, wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. Excuse me? You heard me. Carol didn't flinch. This girl, she pointed at me, took care of your parents every single day while you were too busy to visit. She bathed them. She fed them. She held your mother's hand when she was scared. Carol's voice cracked, but she kept going. What did you do, Diane? Send flowers? Someone gasped. Paul stepped forward, reaching for Diane's arm, but she shook him off. You have no right. I have every right. I was Margaret's best friend for 40 years. Carol moved to stand beside me, her hand on my shoulder. And I know exactly what kind of daughter you've been. The silence was absolute. Somewhere, a fork clinked against a plate. Diane's face went red, then white. For the first time, I saw something crack in her composure. Something uncertain. Carol leaned down and whispered in my ear. I talked to Gerald this morning. He told me what's coming. Just wait, honey. Just wait. 3 days later, I walked into Gerald Sanford's office on the 12th floor of the Hartford Financial Building. The receptionist led me to a conference room at the end of the hall. Dark wood, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The kind of room where important things happened. Diane was already there, seated at the head of the table like she owned it, her handbag placed just so, her posture perfect. Paul sat beside her, scrolling through his phone with the restless energy of a man who wanted to be anywhere else. I took the seat across from them, my cane leaned against the chair. Diane didn't look at me once. Gerald Sanford came in carrying a leather briefcase, a court reporter trailing behind him. He looked older than I remembered, silver-haired, composed, with the calm of a man who had spent decades delivering life-changing news to people who weren't ready to hear it. Thank you all for coming, he said, settling into his chair. Before we begin the formal reading, I need to verify a few things. He opened a folder and looked at Diane. Mrs. Marsh, have you ever seen the complete will your parents filed with this office? Diane straightened. I've seen the will. Yes, it was in my mother's nightstand. The document in the nightstand. Sanford nodded slowly. Can you describe it? 4 pages, standard legal language, everything left to me as the eldest daughter. He removed his glasses and cleaned them with a cloth, unhurried, almost theatrical. Mrs. Marsh, he said quietly, have you seen the complete will, or just the summary your mother kept as a personal reference? Diane's hand tightened around her bag. Her smile disappeared. What are you talking about? A summary? That was the will. Sanford opened his briefcase and lifted out a thick document, bound in blue legal backing. He set it on the table between us. This is your parents' last will and testament, 32 pages, executed 6 months ago in this office, witnessed by 2 of my associates, notarized, and filed with the probate court. Diane leaned forward. That's impossible. I saw the will. It was dated 5 years ago. What you saw, Mrs. Marsh, was a preliminary draft. Your parents kept it in the nightstand for reference, but they revised their estate plan significantly before their passing. He tapped the new document. This is the legal version, the only one that matters. Paul's phone clattered to the table. He didn't pick it up. This is fraud. Diane stood, her chair scraping against the hardwood. You're helping her commit fraud. She probably... Mrs. Marsh. Sanford's voice didn't rise, but it hardened. I have been your family's attorney for 22 years. I drafted your parents' first will when you were 15 years old. I do not commit fraud, and I don't appreciate the suggestion. Diane opened her mouth, then closed it. Her hands were shaking. Sit down. It wasn't a request. She sat. I watched my sister's face cycle through disbelief, anger, and fear. When she finally looked at me, there was something new in her eyes, something close to panic. They wouldn't do this, she whispered. They wouldn't. Perhaps, Sanford said, turning pages. We should let your parents speak for themselves. The room felt smaller, the air felt thinner, and I understood that everything was about to change. Sanford read slowly, deliberately, letting every word carry its full weight. To our daughter, Diane Elaine Whitfield Marsh, we leave our investment portfolio, valued at approximately $14 million, to be held in a managed trust. Diane may withdraw a maximum of $50,000 per year, with the remainder distributed to her children upon their 30th birthdays. Diane made a sound like she'd been struck. A trust? Paul leaned forward. What do you mean, a trust? We need that money now. Sanford continued as though he hadn't spoken. The document includes a letter from your parents explaining their reasoning. Shall I read it? Yes, I said, before Diane could object. Sanford adjusted his glasses. We love Diane with all our hearts, but we have watched her struggle with financial decisions throughout her adult life. We have watched money disappear into ventures that never came to anything. We do not wish for our life's work to vanish within a year of our passing. The trust is not a punishment, it is protection." Diane's face had gone from white to gray. Paul was staring at the table like he wanted it to swallow him whole. Sanford turned several more pages. "Regarding the family home and surrounding property, valued at approximately $4 million. I stopped breathing. We leave our home to our daughter, Grace Ann Whitfield, with the condition that it may not be sold for a period of 10 years. Grace has been our comfort and our companion through our final years. She has tended our garden, held our hands, and given us peace. The house belongs to her. She has earned it." My vision blurred. Somewhere far away, Diane was saying something, objecting, demanding, but I couldn't hear a word of it. All I could hear were my parents' voices reaching out to me from beyond the grave. "There's one more thing," Sanford said. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small drive. "Your parents recorded a video to be played at this reading. They were quite insistent about it." Diane's head snapped up. "What video? I never knew about any video." "That was rather the point, Mrs. Marsh." Sanford connected the drive to a laptop, and a moment later my mother's face filled the screen mounted on the wall. She was sitting in our living room, in her favorite chair by the window. My father stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder. They both looked tired. They both looked resolved. "Girls," my mother began, "if you're watching this, it means we're gone, and it means things have unfolded the way we feared they might." My father spoke next. "Diane, you're our firstborn. We've loved you since the moment you arrived. But love doesn't mean blindness. We've watched how you treat your sister. We've seen the way you dismiss her, diminish her, push her aside." My mother's eyes glistened. "Grace, you are not useless. You never were. You are our quiet strength. While Diane chased after things that glittered, you stayed. You cared. You showed up. We changed our will after Christmas." My father's voice cracked. "After we watched Diane leave you out of the family photo. After we heard her tell your mother that you were dragging us down. We weren't going to let our deaths become one more way for you to be erased." My mother reached toward the camera. "We hope the two of you can find your way back to each other. We really do. But if you can't, if Diane keeps down this path, at least Grace will never be thrown out of her own home." The screen went dark. I couldn't see anything through my tears. But I heard Diane's chair scrape back as she stood and walked out of the room without a single word. If you've ever had someone in your family finally see your worth, even if it came too late, then you already know exactly how Grace felt in that moment. Type "finally" in the comments if this part hit close to home for you. And for those of you wondering what Diane did next, trust me, the story isn't over yet. The real confrontation was still coming. But first, tell me, do you think Diane deserved what she got? Or was it too harsh? Let me know below. Now, back to the story. Diane hadn't gotten far. I found her in the hallway outside the conference room, leaning against the wall with her arms wrapped around herself. Paul stood a few feet away, phone pressed to his ear, murmuring urgently to someone, a bank maybe, or a creditor, the people who were already circling their lives like sharks. When Diane saw me, something in her broke. "This isn't fair. You don't understand. I have a family to support. I have responsibilities. You have a sister you told to find somewhere else to die." She flinched. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." I kept my voice steady. "You meant every word. You've meant it for years. You don't know what it's like." She was crying now, mascara streaking down her face. "Paul's investments collapsed. We owe $400,000. The bank is going to take our house. My kids are going to lose their home." She pointed a shaking finger at me. "And you? You don't have anyone. You don't have kids. You don't need the money." I let her words sit in the air between us. "You're right," I said quietly. "I don't have kids. I don't have a husband. I don't have any of the things you think make a person worth something." I took a step closer. "But I also never spent years treating my own sister like garbage. I never stood in our parents' house 3 days after their funeral and told you to go find somewhere else to die." Diane's shoulders shook. For just a moment, she looked like the little girl I remembered from childhood, lost, scared. But then I remembered all the years she made me feel worthless. And I remembered that compassion has its limits. I could have destroyed her right there. I could have listed every cruel word, every dismissive look, every time she made me feel like I didn't deserve to exist. I could have told her exactly what I thought of her perfect life, her perfect image, her perfect lies. But that isn't who I am. That isn't who our parents raised me to be. So instead, I leaned on my cane and spoke calmly. You told me to find somewhere else to die. I found somewhere. I paused. It's called home. Diane's breath caught. I'm not going to gloat, Diane. That's not who I am, but I am going to set a boundary. I met her eyes. You will never speak to me that way again. Not in private, not in public, not in front of your kids. I am done being the person you take your worst moments out on. She stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. I have a proposal, I continued. The trust gives you $50,000 a year. It's not nothing, but I know it won't fix what's happening right now. I took a breath. I'm willing to lend you what you need to pay off the bank. No interest. Reasonable terms. Enough to save your house and keep your kids in school. Diane's mouth opened, then closed. But there's one condition. I held up a hand. You apologize publicly, at a family dinner, in front of everyone who was at the memorial reception. You tell them what you said to me, and you tell them you were wrong. The hallway went silent. Paul had stopped talking on the phone. He was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Diane wiped at her eyes. And if I don't? Then you figure it out on your own. Your choice. Diane didn't answer. She looked at Paul, who looked at the floor. Then she gathered what was left of her composure, picked up her bag, and walked toward the elevator. Paul followed without looking back. The doors closed, and I was alone in that hallway. Gerald Sanford appeared beside me a moment later, a gentle hand on my elbow. Miss Whitfield, we still have some paperwork to finish. I nodded and followed him back into the conference room. The court reporter had already left. The screen was dark. It was just Sanford and me, and the weight of everything that had happened. He slid documents across the table, deeds, account transfers, signature pages. I signed where he pointed, my hand trembling slightly. Your parents were proud of you, Sanford said as I signed the final page. They told me so, many times. Your mother especially. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. She said you were the only thing that made those last months bearable. I couldn't say anything back. She also said something else. He pulled a sealed envelope from his briefcase. She asked me to give you this, after the reading. A letter, just for you. I took the envelope. My mother's handwriting was on the front. For Grace, when you're ready. One more thing. Sanford stood and shook my hand. Your father asked me to tell you that he changed the will the day after Christmas. He said, his voice caught, he said he finally understood which daughter saw them as people and which one saw them as a bank account. I walked out of that office holding the deed to my childhood home, $14 million sitting in a trust with my name on it, and a letter from my mother pressed against my chest. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like grief. 1 month later, I moved into my parents' bedroom. It felt strange at first, sleeping where they had slept, waking up to the same view of the garden my mother had looked out on every morning for 30 years. But it also felt right, like they had been saving that space for me all along. I kept up with physical therapy 3 times a week. Most days now, I don't need the cane at all. I'm walking on my own, cooking my own meals, starting to imagine what a future might actually look like. The neighborhood had shifted in small ways. People who had been at the memorial reception, the ones who laughed when Diane called me resourceful, started crossing the street when they saw me coming. Word had gotten around about the will reading, about the video, about what Diane had said and what it had cost her. They were embarrassed. Good. Diane and Paul sold their house in Greenwich for $650,000. After paying off their debts, they barely had enough left for a security deposit on a 2-bedroom apartment 40 minutes outside the city. Paul was let go from his firm once his failed investments came to light, something about unreported losses and furious clients. He's working at a regional bank now, for a fraction of his old salary. Their kids transferred from private school to public. Diane told people it was because the public school had a better arts program. Nobody believed her. She called me once, 3 weeks after the reading. "Is your offer still on the table?" Her voice was flat, worn down. "Yes. I'm not ready to apologize yet." I was quiet a moment. "Then I'm not ready to write a check." The line went dead. But she had called. That was something. It wasn't forgiveness, but it might have been the start of accountability. 2 months after the reading, I finally opened my mother's diary. I had been carrying it around since Nora gave it to me, keeping it on my nightstand, sometimes just holding it while I fell asleep. But I hadn't been able to bring myself to read it. The thought of hearing my mother's voice again, even through her own handwriting, felt like reopening a wound I wasn't sure I could close. But that night, sitting out in her garden under the stars, I finally felt ready. The early entries were ordinary: grocery lists, doctor's appointments, notes about the weather and which flowers were blooming. My mother had always been a practical woman, even in her private thoughts. Then I reached the last 10 pages, the ones about Diane and me. "I love my eldest daughter, but I worry for her. She's chasing something she can never quite catch: approval, success, the appearance of perfection. I hope she finds peace one day. I hope she realizes that what she already has is enough." Then, about me. Grace doesn't know how much she saved us after the accident, when she moved back home. I thought I was the one taking care of her, but she was taking care of us. Just by being here, making breakfast, reading to me, sitting with Walter in the garden, she saved us from a loneliness I didn't even know we were drowning in. The last entry was dated 3 weeks before the accident. "Grace is my mirror, patient, quiet, strong in ways nobody notices until it's too late." I should have told her more often. I should have said the words out loud instead of just writing them here. If you're reading this, Grace, know this: you were never useless. You were everything. I closed the diary and looked up at the sky. The tears came, but they felt different this time. Not grief, release. 6 months after our parents' death, I went back to work, part-time at first, consulting for a landscape design firm in Hartford. Small projects, nothing too demanding, but it felt good to use my hands again, to watch something beautiful grow out of nothing. My first real project was the garden behind our parents' house. My mother had planted roses, hydrangeas, a small vegetable patch that had gone wild in the months since she'd been well enough to tend it. I redesigned the whole space, kept her roses, added new pathways, built a small bench where I could sit and remember. It wasn't going to win any awards, but it was mine. It was home. Diane sent a letter 4 months after the will reading. Not a call, not a visit, a letter. "I've been thinking about what you said, about what I said, about all of it. I'm not ready to apologize in front of everyone. I don't know if I ever will be, but I want you to know I'm trying to understand why I became this person. And I'm sorry, even if I can't say it out loud yet." I read the letter 3 times. Then I put it away in my desk drawer, right next to our mother's diary and our father's business card. It wasn't the apology I had asked for. It wasn't public. It wasn't accountability. But it was something. We never became close after that. We probably never will be. But we can sit in the same room now without pretending the other one doesn't exist. We exchange birthday cards. Maybe, eventually, we build something new out of what's left. My name is Grace Whitfield. I was told I was useless. I was told to find somewhere else to die. Instead, I found home. If Grace's story reminded you that your worth isn't decided by what other people think of you, I'd love to hear from you. Type "Boundaries Matter" in the comments if this one resonated. And if you've ever been underestimated by your own family, share your story below. I read every single one. If you want more stories like this one, check the video linked in the description, and don't forget to follow so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for watching.